As many people know, the Rlaarlo XTS-S10 is out, and a lot of people are having a lot of fun with them. But there's a question to be answered. Can the XTS-F10 be converted into an XTS-S10? In this video, we will find out. Stay tuned. Aloha and welcome to Ninth Island RC. In today's video, we are going to see if an XTS-F10 can be converted into an XTS-S10. Now, obviously, I don't yet know if this is going to work or not, and whether it does or not, the video will be posted. But if in the description the parts are listed, then you know that it was a success. So, for those of you who have the patience and just want to be surprised, just keep watching the entire video. And for the rest, the ones that are lazy, the ones that have no patience, the ones that order from Amazon and want it yesterday, go ahead, check the description. If you see the parts listed, you know it worked. If you don't see the parts listed, well, you know it was a failure. So, what are we going to need? Now, as you can see from this, that I've already installed the 90mm conversion, which used aluminum suspension arms. Now, there are a lot of people that did not like that, and they wanted plastic suspension arms, of which Rlaarlo did not have available at that point in time. Although, some of us knew that they would be coming out with them. So, obviously, when the XTS-S10 came out, they had the plastic arms. So, probably wondering, what are you going to need to convert? Another thing that some people did not like was that the XTS-F10 used plastic upper suspension arms, and with the 190mm conversion, as you can see, they had switched to links. And a lot of people, again, did not like that. So, another problem that people discovered, unfortunately, was that with the stock shock towers, the height was too high, too tall, and there were quite a few bodies out there that just could not install. So, the solution, hopefully this is going to work. Now, as you'll notice, obviously there is no electronics in here. This vehicle has never been run. I did the 190mm conversion. I did have electronics installed, but I removed them for the purpose of this video. Obviously, also the front bumper is removed. There are some things that I've already prepped in advance. Now, something you might notice is the magnetic mounts here. So, for the body that I will be using, I don't want to drill holes. So, what I came up with is I will be using the I will be using the drifting magnetic mounts from hot racing. Okay, so, and what will be needed? Obviously, you're going to need the lower suspension arms, and for these, the front is the rear. In other words, the front right is going to be the rear left. I got that backwards. The front right, rear left, and the front left, rear right. For the upper suspension arms, there are separate front and rear, and they are labeled. So you will need those. You will also need the front and rear shock towers. Now, if you've purchased the 190 conversion kit, that should be all you'll need. Although, if you want, you can also get the carbon fiber inserts. Now, something I did notice, speaking of the inserts, the carbon fiber inserts for the XTS-F10 suspension arms come with the screws needed, whereas these obviously are not coming with the screws. So you will need the screws, and since if you have the carbon fiber version which had the inserts already installed, you're just going to use those screws. So you will need those. Carrying over from the I'll just call it the F10 and the S10. So carrying over from the F10, the if you did the conversion, you probably wanted, you saved the screws and nuts that held the upper suspension arm. So you will need those. And then also, if you already did the conversion, you will need the upper pins as well as the rear shock tower pin inserts. So with that, let's get these wheels off and just start prepping. Now we got the first part of it done, which is just getting the shocks off the shock towers. Now, something that some of you may have noticed was that for the front shocks, I had the nut from behind, and on the rear shocks, I had the nut, well, technically from behind as well, but in other words, the screw went through the shocks with the mount on the front, not on the back, and that is because before Rlaarlo officially announced the S10, my plan was to cut this shock tower down, and I was actually going to mount shocks to these lower holes down here and seriously cut the shock tower way down. Didn't know if I was going to have to do the back or not, but the front, because the front is the primary problem. Most hoods are lower on cars, and that was what was causing the real problem for most people. So my plan originally was going to be to do that and then to replace the Rlaarlo shocks with Traxxas GTRs, but thankfully the S10 uses lower shock towers, and that was an easier way to go. So now that we've got the shocks off, next step is going to be to remove the sway bars from the arms, front and rear, and remove and install the new shock towers. So let's move on to that part. Okay, so step 2 is getting the shock towers off, and as you notice, just leave the links on. You don't need to take the links off because they're not going to get used. Now, pay attention when you are taking out the screws, because something I discovered in the rear, don't know if this is the front, but we'll just say it's the rear. So in one of these two lower of those triangle points, I discovered that Rlaarlo had used an 8mm screw. Those screws are supposed to be 12mm. And since I don't have any black oxide, I do have M2.5 by 12mm stainless steel, so I'm going to have to use that in the meantime until I can get a black oxide screw. Okay, so now that we got that off, let's go ahead and get the sway bars out. And you can actually leave the front part attached. You don't need to remove that. You're just going to remove the screws holding them into the lower suspension arms and then just rotate up and over. Okay, so we got the sway bars removed. And again, just rotated. Next thing we're going to do is now we're going to install the new shock towers. All right, so there we've got the shock towers in. And just a reminder, when putting the rear shock tower in, don't forget the little pills. Common in race vehicles, not so common in general bashing vehicles, but that's the route Rlaarlo decided to go. I'm not saying don't forget them because I forgot them. I did not forget them, but just reminding, because the shock tower for the 190 conversion kit does not use those. So just remember to put that in. Okay, so now that we've got the shock towers in, next thing is, from this point, or I should say up to this point, pretty much knew that everything, was going to go well. We already knew that these were going to fit. So the real question is going to be in regards to the upper and lower suspension arms. Now, I have not actually tested it, but I would assume that, just like with many of the previous Rlaarlo vehicles, that you can use the front CVDs on the rear instead of the stock dog bones. But again, I have not actually tested that, so for right now, as you notice, this vehicle still has the stock uprights, stock steering. No upgrades have been done. I will be doing an upgrade video, but for that I will be utilizing the F10 and not the S10. And that should be coming sometime in the near future. I know I've been promising that one for quite a while, and it will come. I do promise it will come. I've got all the parts. Just so many other things have been taking up time in my life. So now let's just go ahead and get the upper suspension arms installed. Okay, so now we've got the upper suspension arms on. And you'll notice that I did already remove the screws and nuts from the F10 suspension arms and put them on the new upper suspension arms. So the next step is going to be to remove the uprights from the lower suspension arms, remove the retainers, remove the pins, replace the lower suspension arms with the upper ones. Before I do that, going to remove the inserts from the old arms. You can see the F10 arms are definitely much longer, and to use those screws to put the inserts into the new ones. So let me go ahead and do those first. All right, now for the big reveal. But first, I do have to admit, I do have some good news, and I also have some bad news. Although the good news is not great, it is very good. And as for the bad news, it's actually very minor. So, without any further ado, we have the XTS-F10 to F10 conversion. I am going to consider this a success, even though it's not complete, as you can see. So, let's start with the bad news. Now, honestly, I already suspected this going into this, and if everything else had worked exactly as I was hoping it would, and this little problem did show itself, I'm still gonna consider it a success. And if you check in the description, you will find the parts list as promised. So what exactly is the problem? Well, as you can see here, the rear upright hub is too wide. If you look at the new arms, the spacing here is a bit narrower. And if you work your way to the front, it's the exact same problem. Exact same. So what's going on? Well, as a lot of people already know, Rlaarlo redesigned the hubs because the hubs as they were not universal to a large variety of wheels. And if you look at the stock wheels, kind of like short course, if you think, say, Traxxas Slash, where the ID is smaller on the outside and larger on the inside, and that's so that they can fit larger hubs. So Rlaarlo did redesign the hubs front and rear to allow a larger variety of aftermarket wheels to be used. So what I will need is new rear hub, new front C-hub, possibly new steering knuckles, don't know on that yet. And then the front pin and the rear pins. I believe the pins should be the same front and rear. Well, obviously, because the suspension arms are the same. So that is all that should be needed. And again, the steering knuckles, not 100% sure, but because I will be ordering the aluminum parts of these, then I'm just going to go ahead and get the knuckles. And I'll probably, switch the hexes as well, but that's not a necessity, not for this project. But as I said, I do consider this a success, and so if you look in the description, you will find the parts, and they will be listed in two groupings. The first group is going to be the parts that are needed for those who already have the 190mm conversion kit. The secondary list will be additional parts needed for those who are just dealing with a stock XTS-F10. Obviously, parts you're going to need are, for example, the drive shafts, things like that. Now, the one thing that I do not yet know, and I can't even check and test, are the shocks. The shock towers are shorter, and that leads me to believe that definitely shorter shocks will be needed. So I will look into that. I will include the parts for that, although again, I may still stick with the Traxxas GTR shocks that I bought. See how that works. But there you have it. Stay tuned for part 2, and honestly I don't know how long that's going to take because I'm going to have to order the parts and wait for them to be delivered. Part 2 will come at some point in the future, and before I do part 2 on this, I may have the full upgrade video for the XTS-F10. So, there you have it. Until next time, mahalo.